you have a seat, Mr. Johnson. I understand you have a potential legal problem today.
Yes, I had an issue come up a few nights ago, and I started to worry. So I figured that I should come and speak to a lawyer to just see what my options are.
Well, that's always a good idea. Tell me a little bit about it.
I used to have my own restaurant years ago, and one of the things that I was famous for was my desserts. The restaurant went down about 10 years ago. However, while I had it, I established a party at my house called the Chocolate Extravaganza.
Well, that sounds like my kind of party.
Yes, a lot of people say that. It started off with me just having a few friends round and serving some of the most popular desserts from the restaurant. But over the years, it got bigger and bigger. Now I have other people come over and they serve their desserts, and it's grown to over 100 people every year. It's a lot of fun, and since we don't serve any alcoholic beverages, I figured there'd be no problem.
So you're worried about social host liability?
Yes, but I didn't know what it was called. I've heard from a couple of people that if you're having a party at your house and you serve someone who's obviously intoxicated and then they go out and do something bad, you could be held liable too.
That is a pretty good summary of what social host liability is all about.
Well, I think I might have a new wrinkle on the issue. I have a friend of mine, Ted, who's a diabetic. He likes to come to my parties even though he doesn't eat any of the desserts. Actually, I make him a special diabetic desserts. It's proven to be really popular with people who are trying to lose weight as well.
Well, so far I don't see what the problem is.
Over the past few years, I've tried to come up with bigger and better desserts. This year, I think I really outdid myself. I made a 17-layer chocolate cake with a chocolate fondue fountain right on top of it. People went wild about it. Unfortunately, it was so good that even Ted decided to have a slice of it himself. This thing was about 3 feet tall and it weighed about 50 pounds. I figured that Ted would just have one slice and leave it at that. However, I heard from other people that he ended up having 5 slices altogether.
So he went into a diabetic coma?
Well, I wish it was as simple as that. After his 5th and final slice, he waved goodbye and he got into his car and drove off. While he was on the interstate, he slipped into a diabetic coma and he caused a multi-car accident. A couple of people were seriously injured, and I've had several people coming up to me telling me that I might be liable as well. That's what brought me here today. What do you think?
Well, I've heard of social host liability being used in many contexts before, but I can't remember one that involved desserts. Let's review the basics first, and we'll discuss the dessert issue later. The idea behind social host liability is that the host can't claim that he wasn't responsible when he served alcohol to a clearly intoxicated guest. Before the social host liability concept was created, a host could provide his guest with as much liquor as he wanted and not be worried about any consequences that may have happened to that guest when they left the party. Eventually, all states adopted a social host liability scheme, and part of the responsibility was then put on the host. We all know that people, when they're intoxicated, don't exercise the best judgment. So when the host clearly ignores common sense and continues to serve someone that's obviously intoxicated, part of the responsibility for what the drunk person does shifted to the person hosting the party. The idea was to discourage drunken driving by making the host also liable for the action carried out by the drunk person. That's the simple overview of social host liability doctrine. However, that doctrine was never meant to completely eliminate the guest's responsibility for their actions. In this case, we have a person who knows that he is a diabetic and overindulgence in sweets. True, you made the desserts available, but I don't see how any court would find you liable for a person who is diabetic eating 5 slices of chocolate cake and then attempting to drive home.
So you think I'm off the hook?
I wouldn't go that far. The law is really set in stone, but if someone does decide to sue you, it could be a bit of a fight before the court decides to find you not liable under the social host media doctrine.
Okay. I do feel a little bit better now. Say we didn't discuss what your fee would be for giving me this advice today.
Well, why don't you just make me one of those desserts?